Welcome, one and all, throughout time and space for this episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode, we will cover the news for the third week of July 2022, after which we will give our thoughts on whether to resurrect or rebury the 2012 anime franchise Campione. My name is Sam Martinez. I'm a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time English language sensei. Now, Jay, on to a little bit of a good tie-in tangent to our anime, which is about killing gods. I know you said that you wanted to talk about Thor, Love and Thunder after we've both seen it. So, what were your thoughts on it?
I came out of it thinking, okay, I don't want to be too harsh. And again, this is like going to be limited spoilers, nothing to extend far past what's shown in the trailers, even though trailers sometimes are spoilers in themselves, because like I did not know that the Mighty Thor was going to show up in the movie until I was like standing in line for a ticket where I was like, oh, that's that. And I was like, oh, well, in the comics, the identity of Mighty Thor is kind of kept for like 7 years. It's like not obvious who it is, but like with the movie, it's like, yeah, here's who Mighty Thor is. And surprise, surprise, it's Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, returning in the role as Jane Foster. And I came out of the movie like, wow, this is probably one of the worst Marvel movies up there with the Eternals. And like I had problems with Doctor Strange for a couple reasons, which I think we talked about in depth because I kept bringing it up. But this was just so bare bones that it feels like a Phase 1 Marvel movie that I was surprised that Taika Waititi, the director, did this movie, because it feels very much like they didn't know what to do with Thor anymore. And I very much love Infinity War and Endgame, and it does feel like the closing of a chapter or even the whole book of the MCU. So I think it's just been a thing of this Phase 4 that the characters don't, or at least Marvel doesn't know really what to do with the remaining Avengers, because Thor in this movie basically reverts back to who he was in Thor 1. He's the gung-ho, he's still the lost child, not knowing what he wants to do with his immortality. He's still griping with the fact that he has these powers and doesn't know what to do with it. And I'm like, dude, grow up. Like, it's been a couple of million years, a couple of 100 years, figure it out. And sure, he's been devastated by the death of almost all his family and more than half his planet.
His best friend, too. Yeah, he lost a lot of people.
Yeah, his brother, mom, sister, technically, too, or half-sister.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's like, it wasn't the character I guess I was expecting to show up in this movie. And then the other thing is, it fundamentally doesn't work even as you're watching the movie, because the whole villain of the movie is God the Butcher. Gore the Butcher. God Butcher. Anyways. And his whole thing is like slaying gods who are in the wrong, they are mistreating their worshippers. And I'm like, shouldn't that be Thor's thing? Because he just handled Thanos doing basically the same thing. Yeah, so my overall problem of it is that like the hero doesn't make sense, the villain doesn't make sense, with Gore kind of being a good guy for dealing with gods that are abusing their authority or their divinity. And you can see that when Russell Crowe shows up as Zeus, being like, yeah, we'll just let this happen, kind of thing. So I was like confused even while I was sitting the movie. Then after letting it sit for a week, I'm like, yeah, it's a bad movie. I probably would go watch Dark World before I watch this again.
That's scathing, because Dark World had some problems, but even though it had some problems, it was still, I guess, a solid movie. But one of the points that one of the interesting things that you made me think about when you compared Gore to Thanos was essentially Gore's endgame. He was trying to be Thanos in a way, in what he wanted to do in terms of like the grand scale of things. And it made me think, it's like, oh, why didn't Thanos try to go do the same thing? But I guess just thinking back on it, like Thanos is more on like the science side, whereas Gore is more on the mysticism side. So Gore would be privy to the knowledge from mysticism, whereas Thanos isn't. And as you said, that's one thing that they could have done a little bit more with Gore is trying to focus on, like the gray nature of what he's doing, on whether or not like it's helpful or it's hindering. But he is going after the deities who are either absentee in their worshippers' lives or are actively being a menace. And it is and that's one thing that Thor learns along his way, is that not everybody is cool like he is. And that's one thing that they could have done to help him grow. And as you said earlier, like, it seems like this new face, it's sort of floundering. It reminds me of the quote in Spider-Man Far From Home, where everybody's coming back from the blip, and it's sort of like a pseudo fourth wall break, where you have the students say, "Is like, what's the next plan? Where are we going? It doesn't seem like anybody knows what's going to happen." Like that sort of thing, where it's like a tongue-in-cheek joke, where it's like talking to the audience, just like, we know that we seem like we don't know what we're doing, but we have a plan. But then we have this movie, it's like, it doesn't really seem like you have a plan. And there's nothing wrong with it feeling more like a phase 1 movie, where they're sort of trying to reset, or at least try to simplify things down a bit, trying to make the movies feel more standalone-ish, or it's like, okay, we're just focusing on Thor and stuff like that. But as you said, when you do revert it, you don't have to revert the character, because there are some times when Thor's regal obligations do come out, and it's like, okay, cool. It's like, this is Thor being classic Thor, but in a good way, coming from a point of growth, because he has grown from the first movie till now, to some extent. But then it sort of just meanders into Taika Waititi comedy. So it could have been better. Some of the action scenes were good, but it did seem a little subpar from what we have gotten so far, like from Spider-Man for Doctor Strange. Even though Doctor Strange had its issues, it was still better than this movie. And Jay, you were excited to talk about this anime where we focus on god killers.
Oh yeah, so this is a second part of our standard episode, where first part we talk about the weekly news, second part we talk about the 10-year anniversary. So if you're interested in the full episode, that'll be on Spotify, but on YouTube you'll be just getting this sweet part of the review of 10 years celebrating a anime that came out in 2012 called is it Campione? Well, the Italian translates to champion, but is it Campione? Just Campione? Trying not to do a stereotypical Italian voice.
Campione. We could just say Campion, to be less racist, until we are told otherwise, or one of our listeners from Italian sends us like an audio message. We can definitely do a fix in the post edits, or talk about it in a subsequent episode. But yeah, as Jay said, Timecode in the description. We're now talking about our anime 10-year anniversary review on the franchise known as Campione. And this was my pick. I have never seen nor heard about this franchise, and this I would consider one of my random picks, because I basically chose it off of the synopsis and thought it was going to be a different anime than it was. And Jay, before I go into the synopsis and the publishers or the studios of this company, what was your exposure to this anime before today?
I had no idea that this existed. Again, it's one of those things of, we talked about it, that there is a, departure of when you watch anime in your teens to, I guess, your early 20s. There's like a transitional period, and it just happened between there. And there's really no lingering, merchandise or effect that this made on the industry. So very much did not know about this existence. It's my first experience with it. So
All right, let's go ahead and let's do it. So, in this series, we follow the main character known as Goto Kusanagi, and we open up in Italy, actually. He is trying to return a tablet of, or an item that his grandfather had gave him. That was one thing they never really explained, whether or not his grandfather had passed away or his grandfather was just saying, "Hey, I need this returned, go and do this for me." He's 16 years old, and we see him walking around in Italy not knowing Italian. And so definitely seeing how prepared this kid definitely takes his trips. But while he's there, he runs into this beautiful woman in red known as
Erica.
Erica. Yes, yes, yes. I completely apologize. So Erica shows up and is basically berating him for holding on to the item that he has. And as they're in the midst of their argument, a giant shining boar comes out of nowhere and starts wrecking the city. And Erica, in magical girl fashion, changes her clothes, oddly enough, from a dress to more of a casual fit, which is a reverse for most magical girl stuff. But she goes and she minimizes damage to the city from the boar, claiming that the boar was a mythical beast that was an avatar for a deity. They go to find the person that owns the tablet that Goto is trying to return, and they learn that the tablet gives Goto the ability to steal powers of gods. And that is one thing that Erica sort of tells Goto, that she works for an organization that deals in rogue gods that come and causes a ruckus where the layman would see them as natural forces, just like a wind or hurricane. But if you are magic sensitive, you would see the being's actual appearance. And during his stay there in Italy, he runs into more gods, and we later find out that he becomes a Campione, which is the name or title they give somebody that is known as a god slayer. And we follow him and Erica basically in Goto's everyday life of what it means to be a Campione. And we were exposed to some other machinations that will be having to deal with prophecies of an endless night that may be occurring. The studio that made this franchise is known as Dio Media. They are known for making Problem Children Are Coming from Another World, aren't they? That's another isekai franchise. They've also done The Skull Man, which is a show that I've been wanting to watch. It's has a very Kamen Rider vibe to it. They also did a newer anime known as Ahiro no Sora in 2019, which is a basketball anime. They also did Beatless and Squid Girl. The source of Campione is a light novel. Its genres are comedy, fancy, romance, ecchi. The theme is harem. It's a rating of PG-13, and it can also be streamed on Crunchyroll and Verve. Now, Jay, after all of that, I would have to say the thing that surprised me the most was the harem theme. I was not expecting that. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that this was probably the one of the more standard or above standard harems that we've seen on this podcast. Do you agree with that statement or no?
Yeah, it's something that I'm reminded when we talk to Anandal about the Cardinal Basket episode is that 2012 was a big year for one reason of the shift to Crunchyroll being like a big player on the anime streaming scene and just, making anime more globally accessible. Is that this is definitely a lot of people's first harem anime. And to, speak to us as aging weebs that, our first probably harem animes were like Love Hina or Tenchi Muro or Nejima. And yeah, this is a standard harem premise of boy gets superpower, boy interacts with large group of females for a contrived reason. So for it to be set in the idea that he's a god slayer is really kind of unique. So we talked about, last year about The World Only God Knows, and essentially a contract that the male lead of that series makes with the devil to capture wayward spirits. And it feels like the same vein of supernatural harem with a intriguing premise, and you don't have to be too three-dimensional with the characters. You can just have the standard yandere, tsundere, and kundere, meaning like their personality types. And for that, it checks off every mark. So yeah, I think it's a good standard set of parameters you can say, oh, I would recommend this as a good starting harem to introduce people to the medium, or at least to that genre.
Okay. I would say, like, one other thing too that was interesting to me in this harem that's different from all the other ones that I've seen was, I guess, like the focus on the kissing scenes that they had. Like the kissing scenes were definitely more erotic, and it's I find it funny because the way that kissing is used in this show is very much how Starfire from Teen Titans used kissing. It's mainly a link so that you can transmit information from one person to the other. For instance, Starfire, she would learn languages, right? By kissing. That's how her people learn different languages. Whereas in the show, the kissing is using also something called words of power, where it's not only giving you information, but can also impose rules on you. For instance, we've seen Godo with deity character, and the deity character is basically putting a spell on her, on Godo, and the only way, or I guess like the most effective way for her to do that was to kiss him. And another way that Godo used the kissing thing is trying to learn information on the deities that Erica already knew. So sort of that pseudo library aspects that we've seen in I forgot what the name of the anime was.
The Mystic Archive of Danteleon.
Yes, Danteleon, yes. I'm mad that I couldn't remember that name because, like I said, I really like the anime. But Jay, aside from that, like, were there any points that you wanted to talk about in regards to this anime? If it's about the harem or about something else in particular, any observations that you made that struck out to you?
It's wild that it does take an approach to this what is that study of multiple gods? Polytheism.
Yeah, polytheism.
In the world, because the first god that they interact with is the Persian god of war, and he's the most chill dude. And it's very interesting how they characterize each of the gods, because one, the deity that you're talking about was Athena. She's the goddess of knowledge I forgot what Athena's in charge of.
Yeah, wisdom, knowledge, and continue. I just want to remind you that I have a point to make about her.
Gotcha. Yeah, because she shows up with her owl, so it's very interesting. She has a lolly body, and then when she gets fully powered, actually, I think that's outside of the 3 episodes. But anyways, yeah, with the 3 episodes, you get introduced to 2 gods in the beginning. So the male gods, again, don't. The male gods with the Persian god of war, he gets slain in the first episode because of the book of Prometheus is the tablet that you were talking about in the beginning, that Prometheus rebelled against the gods. So, like, there's a lot of creative writing inside of setting up the premise again, which is very unique. So he gets this very sick-ass God Slayer sword, which has these very Gilgamesh vibes to it from the Fate Stay series, as well as the main female lead has like a saber kind of dress to her, red saber as well. So I thought that was like allusions to that, like a very clear connection between the Fate series and this. So how Fate deals with a lot of mythology and gods, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe there's some inspiration shared between the two since it's a light novel series. So I was like taking enough interest in the first 3 episodes for that reason, because it does devolve into the whole typical guy doesn't want to be surrounded by chicks paradigm that a lot of these harem animes try to convince you that it's normal, but it's not. So yeah, Erica follows him to Japan. But before I dive into like each of the episodes for the 3 episode test, what did you want to say about Athena?
No. So, like, I'm very glad that you made the Fate Stay comparisons, because I was just like, that was all I was doing throughout this entire episode. Because even with Athena, and I think you learned this a little bit in episode 3, but you learned a little bit more in the next episode. I went forward because I thought that we were going to get a scene in the anime that we were quote unquote promised in the trailer. Not the trailer, but in the intro, and I was looking forward to seeing that. But when they were going on about Athena, like they dove deep hard into her origin and her background, and all throughout, I'm trying to remember which movie it was, but it was the one where in Fate Stay where they focus on Ryder, who is basically Medusa. They focus on her background, on her origin, and they take the route of Medusa having 3 sisters, right? And it's something very similar to what they were doing with Athena here. Whereas, oh, it's like, you were actually this, you weren't this, you were actually somebody's wife, you weren't never somebody's kid, that sort of thing. Where it's like you're pulling back the layers and the frames, trying to discern like which is fact or which is reality within the frames of that show. And it was done fairly well in that regard. I would say some of the other parts, I would maybe with the 2 male gods, I guess the fact that like the Persian god was killed so easily, like that was kind of weird. But like the amount of attention and detail that they gave to Athena, it gives you hope that they're going to be able to do the same to any of the other deities that they go to moving forward. I'll say like I was also dissatisfied with how they handled some of his powers. I mean, I think it's in the 2nd episode where he goes back to Italy so they can give him that test against Erica. They have him basically go through his new power set, because as you said, with the tablet, it allowed him to rebel against the Persian deity. But I think it was told that he could steal a god's power, but from when it was explained, I thought that he was only going to be able to steal the sword. But then it seems like he was able to steal all of that Persian deity's abilities. Even then, like they made it seem like the Persian deity didn't have all of his abilities yet, and so, but yet when Godo has his abilities, or stole the Persian deity's powers, now he has all the person deity's abilities. So it was, like I said, just some of the stuff's a little muddled up. It's like they would pick and choose what they would go into great detail with, and the other one, and other times it would be like, oh, it just happens. But it is very, what's the word? It is cohesive, because when him and Erica kiss for the first time, that's when he's able to kill the deity, and then when they kiss the second time, it's explained what goes on, or what's going on when they kiss. So it sort of explains like what happened that first time. But um Jay, you wanted to talk about the 3 episode tests. So did you want to go into each one individually, or you wanted to talk about them just in general?
Just in general, because we do the 3 episode test to see if it's worth resurrecting or reburied, and that's what the segment's called. If it's worth bringing back, 10 years later, if it holds up for certain reasons. And given the studio, like you mentioned before, you listed off their credentials, or at least some of their filmography, and say that they're still continuing today. So nothing in the way of like janky use of CGI is present. So with all the magical spells, I didn't find it too alarming to the fact that it's 10 years old. So like there's a lot of magical spells, and the transformation scenes are pretty well, animated.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing too wonky with the background art as well, and the character design. So it's like all above standard board. Like I said, it's a very good first anime that you can recommend. To the point of, with us being experienced in the media, we know like there's other better examples, like even with Data Life, which is premiering its 4th season. I think we talked about it in the previous episode. But even from last year, like High School DxD kind of has the same premise of main character is not horny, but he gets his powers from, being excited, sexually excited in a way. There's also 2016's Luck and Logic. So again, I think it's a really interesting case overall to look at Campione, because of how the anime industry has progressed using kind of the premise of main male character gets in sexual contact with other people. Let's just say other people, because sometimes they do delve into what happens with main MCs with male interactions. So like this is such bare bones to the structure. It's like, oh yeah, this is safe to recommend. And even with the 3 episodes, is that at the very end of the 3rd episode, you're like, oh, here's what's going to happen next time. There's going to be a conflict between him and Athena, because in the 2nd episode, he gets another grimoire or cursed book. And it gets revealed that that grimoire that he has is basically the start of the apocalypse if the goddess Athena gets it, because it restores her full power. So like what you were saying about there's some kind of muddleness to what the gods' power sets are, or how they're really going to be manifested inside the world. So it does feel like something that's probably going to get fleshed out in the next 13 episodes. So like there's plenty of material to, expand this into a 2nd and 3rd season, since the light novel is like 21 volumes, as well as the manga series. So just basing off these first 3 episodes, I would say it does a good job enough. It like passes the 3 episode test, in my estimation. But would I really recommend it, since there's other things that I would recommend over it? Or even in the year of our Lord 2022, we have anime like, I think we talked about how, even like Bastard kind of works on the same premise. It's like, you get powers from being kissed by a girl. So it's like, can I say that this is a good 3 episode test? Yes. Will I say that it's worth resurrecting? I would say no. But how about you?
I'm really glad that you went first and you were able to explain it, because I was on the fence of the resurrection or reburied, because very much like you said, like it does pass the 3 episode test. Like it made me want to go on even further and keep watching. And but to continue on the positives, like the action is very good. So the Sakuga scene where the boar shows up and is just wrecking the town, that scene was just very, very well animated. And not only that scene, but all of the action scenes, they are so crisp and clean, and it seems like the money was definitely partitioned very well so that all the fight scenes can be good. So like as I'm watching this show, like I'm looking forward to see the fight scenes because I want to see the choreography. I want to see what all that they are going to do. I would say like it does seem like uh those scenes maybe take a little bit of a dip going on, but it could just be reallocating because it seems like they're trying to go for a bigger scene because in the show he has to prove himself by finding another Campione, finding another person who killed a god. And it will be interesting seeing that big bad's power set. Again, just going back to like some of the muddleness that I had mentioned, like we don't really know all the powers that he got. Apparently, whenever he uses his powers, like a wheel shows up, and I don't know if it's 12 symbols, but like every time I see it, I think about the zodiac, right? And at first, it makes you think that it's something along some sort of astrological signs because you have the boar. He has the boar, which gives him the ability to trample over anything. He has the horse, which allows him to steal a god's power move. He has a phoenix that helps him to where he can move very fast. But then he also has another power that they call the Tempest, which allows him to teleport to where somebody is praying for him. Which that's a cool power, but then again, I'm already thinking that he has like the zodiac thing, but then it's talking about something that's known as the Tempest. So like his power set is definitely not of zodiac origin, but they don't really go into it. I guess that kind of works because he's trying to figure out his powers on his own, but you have Erica there that's basically a walking library of the occult. So I would feel like she would explain everything to him, but they don't. So as far as again, I agree with you, Jay. I do believe that as the 3 episodes, it passes, but as a resurrection or rebury, I do believe that this does still need to be reburied because I'm glad that you brought up high school double D because it's something very similar, but at least for me, double D, even though the story may not be as tight as they're trying to go for Campione, but it at least like it there's something more compelling in high school double D that makes you keep wanting to watch it. I guess the either it's the personality of the main character or the conviction that he has in doing things because with Godo as a main character, he's more or less indifferent. I mean, he has a side of compassion to him because there are times when the first time he ran into Athena, Athena's like, "Yo, let's throw hands," and he says, "I don't want to scrap with you." It's like it's not that serious, that sort of thing. Like he can be very interesting, but I guess it's just like they don't really put him in situations to showcase that enough. Whereas in high school double D, they put the main character in situations that makes his character more interesting as more things about him are revealed. I suppose that would be why I would rebury Campione. So that's very interesting. That it just shows that like we still think that like this is still good like as a standard, right? As a standard harem, but as far as that's also one thing that's weird too because like you said, this is a good starter, but we both agreed not to resurrect it. I would say like that in itself is fairly interesting to think about moving forward. Do you have any other thoughts, Jay, before we close things up?
Just that, talked about a few things like, I think it's easy to overlook because I think there's a lot of inferred things to it. And I think there's a lot of attention to detail that can go overlooked. So I think it's like worth a maybe rewatch. So again, not a rewatch like rewatch for our sake, because like what I took away from the whole situation with the Persian god of war is because, it's one of those things that happens in harem that the main MC is the only worthwhile male in the series. And then the first god that he fights is a male. And he has a very long Persian name, so I'm sorry that I'm not saying it properly. But he's the Persian god of war, and the reason why he's going around to different gods and the reason why he has different abilities is because he's going around stealing gods' abilities by killing them. So that's why the whole Boar, Tempest, Phoenix thing is so mismatched. They're from different gods across mythology or lore from different cultures. So they're not just a zodiac. They're not just the astrological signs. So they're like cherry picking abilities. He's cherry picking abilities based off of things he wants because he's no longer worshipped as a god anymore. So I guess there's a lot of subtlety to it that's, I think, is just left open for interpretation because it's a light novel. So I think one category we always keep coming back to is that it should be rewritten and then, then resurrected. So like, I would say this deserves another remake or rewrite and a second season, but without those things as it exists currently, I definitely say it's worth a reburied.
No, I definitely understand because I've done that to some of our other anime in the past where I would rebury them for the sake of a newer version to come along to pick it up. Right. So I can definitely see that this needs to have that attention because again, when we run into the Persian deity, he's again, like it seems like he is trying to get a set number of powers, but he doesn't have it all. And I guess that's what was a bit confusing because at first I was under the impression that he only had 2. And then having Godo stealing his abilities, he has like 10 or 12. I'm like, what? But now it's a bit understandable that way. So again, that was our thoughts on Campione, where we both gave a resounding rebury for the sake of a rewrite. It passed the episode test, but again, we felt as though it needs to be reburied. Tune in with us next time as we try to see what it's like living with gods rather than trying to fight them in the anime known as Kami-sama Kiss. Now, Jay, what have you got for us today?
All right, so I'll close with my closing, but just as a final reminder that the full episode of this episode will be up on Spotify, and just the 10-year review was going to be on YouTube because, visually it's more stimulating to watch something on YouTube for the amazing animation work being done in the video form. And then you can listen to our soothing voices on Spotify for an hour-long session. But yes, I will close with another lyric that I thought to continue on from talking about Little Dicky from last time. So this time is going to be No Church in the Wild, which is by Jay-Z. And it goes, human beings in a mob. What is a mob to a king? What's a king to a god? What's a god to a non-believer who doesn't believe in anything? Will he make it out alive? All right, no church in the wild.